Thomas Richards, professor of English. I teach at Columbia College, Fort Leonard Wood, and I am here to tell you a little about the SORRAT experiments and the Cox-Calvin RSPK automatic filming device experiments, which are a part of SORRAT. Now, in 1959, I met John G. Neihart, Poet Laureate of Plain States of the United States and Poet Laureate of Nebraska. Dr. Neihart introduced me to the SORRAT concept, Society for Research on Rapport and Telekinesis. I'm going to skip a great many of the details, but SORRAT was formed in September 1961 at Skyrim Farm near Columbia, Missouri. This was Dr. Neihart's home. He made me one of the original members of this group, and my job was largely to record any phenomena which might take place. Dr. Neihart's idea in forming SORRAT was to see if he could replicate the phenomena, the physical, paranormal phenomena which took place during many 19th century experiments and apparently was no longer taking place, chiefly because no one seemed to be running experiments to find out about these things. Now, things were being done which he did not know about, but we thought at the time that SORRAT was the only group of its sort. Now, in the fall of 1961, we began getting some minor physical phenomena, raps and slight vibrations of tables. By the spring of 1962, there were gross movements of physical objects. We would sit around a table in the usual sort of seance circle, and we would attempt to simply accept whatever happened. We weren't striving to get something to happen. Wasn't a mental effort involved at all. We were just seeing what would happen, and many things did happen. Now, I'm going to skip over the intervening years because gradually things got increasingly strong with the physical phenomena. In the mid-1960s, Dr. Neihart contacted his old friend from the 1930s, Dr. Joseph Banks Rhine, the Foundation for Research on the Nature of Man in Durham, North Carolina. Rhine made suggestions for making observation boxes and other things that would provide an atmosphere for contained PK movements, psychokinetic movements of target objects. Next step involved William Edward Cox. Now, Dr. Rhine sent Mr. Cox out to Missouri to work with the SORRAT group. He eventually, with the help of his assistant, Steve Calvin, built what he referred to as the Cox-Calvin RSPK, Recurrent Spontaneous Psychokinesis, filming device, and hooked it through micro switches to a mini lab box, a transparent container with micro switches inside a container which could be securely locked and sealed and still allow some of this unusual psychokinetic activity to take place in a controlled environment. Now, Cox had discovered, as we all had, at Skyrim during the experiments there, that the experiments themselves did not require people sitting around in a circle trying to get something to happen. We had assumed earlier that our minds would be what was controlling it, but apparently this wasn't true. It happened whether anyone was present or not. Well, this meant that either you sat around 24 hours a day observing, or you figured out some way to record what did happen when it took place. With Cox's mini lab, we were able to place target objects, designated target objects, on micro switches, and then at any time of the day or night when any PK did take place, the camera would automatically start when the micro switch was tripped. The timer would run, the camera would run for a certain amount of time, and it would capture this on film with lights and camera going on automatically. Therefore, the people involved could go about other things. We'd still run the regular sessions, the experiments, but and there do many other experimental tests which I won't go into, but the mini lab itself would capture automatically what took place. I'd like to show you the mini lab and explain some of the functions of the mini lab. This is the tank, which is fit on top of a solid base. The base has grooves into which the tank fits. The base cannot be slid sideways. The band goes around the mini lab under the base. The only break in the band is at this point. The lock, you'll notice, is a combination lock, is preset by the experimenter only. No one else in the group would know the combination. In addition, Cox also used special string through the hole so that in the band, so that the string could be melted, and then a notary public seal placed over the string to provide extra sealing. Inside the mini lab there are micro switches on which target objects are set. A timer would set off lights and a camera. Once an event had occurred, a switch could be turned off, still leaving other micro switches ready to be triggered by other events. There are, as you see, 6 switches. These are connected to the micro switches inside, enabling all or only a few to be used at one time. I'd like to show some of the films that were made by the mini lab beginning in 1979 and ending in 1981. Now you can see the planchette move in front of the mini lab, pushing the rings out of the way. One of the marjorie rings is leaning against the glass on the inside of the mini lab instead of remaining on its micro switch toward the rear. There goes one of the rings rapidly moving to the right. Planchette moves to the right and runs off of the shelf in front of the mini lab. The ring continues to move slightly. Here you can see cards assorting themselves. Please go to 2 frames. ESP cards assorting themselves from a stack on a micro switch. When a certain number of cards have assorted themselves, it tripped the lights and camera for the decrease in the weight on the micro switch. Here comes a square moving down to the pile of squares. All right, this, you can see the next cards assorting themselves. There's one of them flying through the air and landing. You see them take off. There goes one across and lands. Now they erect themselves rapidly and then rapidly vanish back into the mini lab.
My name is William Edward Cox, and I have appointed myself to be an investigator of the phenomena that have been going on for years in Rolla and in Skyrim near Columbia, Missouri. I've been very interested in psychical research, for well over 50 years. Got into it through magic as a magician, and that has put me in good stead in many ways because I can use the skills that are developed there to accommodate myself in investigating all manners of the paranormal. Clairvoyance, precognition, mind over matter, psychokinesis as it is now called. It used to be called telekinesis, and it is that which has drawn me to the state of Missouri where I now live. And I've been researching with Dr. Tom Richards for 10 years now. But my interests stem from being not only a magician, but having such an interest in psychical research that when I moved to North Carolina in '32, I learned of Dr. Ryan, who had just started his laboratory a few years earlier at Duke University, and I began to associate with him. And after World War II, in which I served only briefly, I began contributing to his journal and then devoting more and more of my time to his work in statistical evidence for ESP, and particularly psychokinesis, in which I was immensely interested. And that's what I have been doing on a scholarly view with statistical scientific evidence that is pretty dull in the lab for years. But then I'm augmenting it now with the most unusual opportunity ever that I've heard of in this field, namely close-up investigation with camera of physical phenomena that are inexplicable. Now, I might call them inexplicable, but I agree with Dr. Richards in his book on the SORRAT, published about 5 years ago, that no matter how strong the observer's personal conviction may be that these experiences are quite genuine in all respects, such an observer can't convince a typical skeptic. And I have tried to say, and I can say very truthfully, that I am most fortunate in accumulating the extraordinary evidences that I will have in the book that I soon will be publishing. It's at a leisurely pace. I had complete control of what I was doing. I wasn't ordered about by any manner of means. And I had the assistance of a chemical engineer from the University of Missouri and their facilities that I used. And finally, the cooperation at my request of Dr. Peter Phillips of the University of Washington University in St. Louis, who had organized a newly funded McDonald Laboratory for Psychical Research. And he made very useful suggestions when he visited us, and then he also contributed his own mini lab for confirmatory tests, which were small but moderately satisfactory. Now, the mini lab that I have built is the invention of Dr. Ryan and his colleagues. It wasn't my idea. He just simply said, make a glass box and seal it up tight. And this I did, and we have had such an inordinate amount of success that I just don't know where to stop.
Now, you've been the pioneer for many years with Dr. Ryan's group, and you're always your own man.
Yeah.
And now this work for all these years. What are your thoughts on the genesis? How does this come about? We're not holding you to it. What reflections? You've given this a lot of thought. I've read parts of your manuscript, which are excellent. I enjoyed it enormously. I'm indebted to you for learning. What's your off-the-cuff opinion?
Well, we know that there are many things that are mysterious in nature. A series of them this particular week, being the week before Halloween, has been covered by NBC News. This morning it was, I forget, but anyway, be that as it may, direct writing is one of the mysteries. It is in itself clearly evidenced in our films. but it is extremely rare. It is one of the most rare effects in psychical research, and therefore it is not readily accepted by critics at all. However, it is as old as Nebuchadnezzar. All you need to do is look in the Bible in the 5th chapter of Daniel, and you'll see where he experienced it on the wall. But most, like his, are just anecdotal. When you have a camera shooting and showing the pen in the process of writing, you have clean evidence, particularly if under seal. And I can assure you, as I can in many other aspects of the production in Rolla, that this one film is the only existing film showing it. There's no question in my mind that there are no other films showing motion pictures of pens writing, not to mention the other effects happening, such as matter through matter. They just don't exist. And that's what's going to give me a considerable amount of trouble in convincing my peers in parapsychology that I haven't been had. But when I ask them how was I had, I think that they will have nothing to say. There just isn't a conceivable explanation, even if the box were not locked with key and seal. Even if you had it open, you would have to be a brilliant professional photographer that could out Hollywood in all its fake levitation and fake manipulations of motion pictures, not to mention commercials on today's television. Any night you look at the television, you will see this and that piece of bread get up and do whatever. But that is not under the conditions that this was done in Rolla, at this one little isolation room in the basement of the address of Dr. Richards. He has no explanation of it, and as for me, I cannot say that I can understand why it happens more frequently in his basement than in Skyrim at Columbia, the homestead of the late Dr. Neihart, who founded this group. But it just is a fortunate coincidence that there are sensitives available. Mr. Joe Mancini is one, and in my opinion, Tom Richards is, although he doesn't want to call himself a medium, and I don't blame him at all. Some people relish the idea, but others don't. Now, Daniel Douglas Home, the most eminent physical sensitive we've ever known, didn't like to be called a medium. He didn't want to be given any more credit for his accomplishments in the physical phenomena of mediumship than Tom Richards. But yet he was brought all over Europe and sat before the crowned heads of Europe way back 1 century ago now, doing many things like this, all sorts of physical phenomena, from floating himself up to the ceiling to causing pens to get up and write. But there were no motion picture cameras then. That's why this is the first motion picture record. They had the phenomena there, and he produced a lot of it. Why, that man could even take red-hot coals out of the stove right there in the living room of the manor house. And he would hold it, lay some lady's cambric handkerchief on it, it wouldn't burn. He would put it back, he wouldn't be harmed. Now, has that any relationship with his ability to float to the ceiling, which upon rare occasion he did?
You say the analogy, since you cite this, is there, because I know of no case where there's such a rich assortment of validated phenomena, from the linking of rings and going to the glass and the fire, etc., writing.
That width is itself interesting because it shows that there is a basic underlying factor that enables any and all of them to occur, as if it were some fifth force of which we know not.
Would you want to speculate on that fifth force?
That fifth force is the only explanation that I can have for accommodating all and every piece of physical phenomena that we have recorded in Rolla. But that is nothing but labeling it, and I do not care to discuss it further because it wouldn't help anything.
There comes a small target object, there comes another one through the glass. you're going to get a letter vanishing. That letter went to someone in another country. Here's a pen moving. Cox tried to get the entities to tell us the identities of some postal robbers. So he put a reward notice that was being circulated up, and we got some information about them, that they were cousins, that they drove a rusty blue Chevrolet truck, and not enough to actually get a reward. Here is a balloon, and I wish that you would rewind this, please, very slowly. Go to 2 frames a second. Reverse. You will see the string tie itself very rapidly in the first couple of frames of this sequence. Just at the start of the sequence, the balloon is on the micro switch, the neck is uppermost, and you can get to see the string tie itself. Please rewind. Forward, please, very slowly. Make sure that you observe this next sequence in which a string rapidly ties itself around the neck of a balloon at the very beginning, and the balloon inflates neck up from its micro switch. Observe the balloon limp. Now, watch carefully as you see the string move very rapidly around the neck and tie itself. The knot, unfortunately, is in the back of the balloon. There. So the string whip around. Now you can go to normal speed. Did you see the string? See the balloon inflating, deflating, inflating, deflating slightly. We found the balloon exactly in this position afterward, and it was absolutely unscathed. No holes, no punctures of any sort. Notice a fire occurring at the same time that a pen is writing a message to be careful with flame. Plastic pendula move slightly from the top of the mini lab. Now you notice those plastic pendula, they are moving disparately, not all moving in the same direction at once. The balloon moves and the plastic pendula, or at least some of them, beat on it from more than one direction at once. So whatever the force is that's controlling it, it does seem to be able to move each one of the small pieces of plastic independently. The pen is up and writing. The pen is off of its micro switch and it has erected and is writing inside the mini lab. It's writing on the strip of paper between the coffee box, the upright envelope, and the mini lab, which doesn't give it very much room to write. In fact, it was a very long, narrow scribbled line. The message in this case wasn't significant. Here you can see some movement of a card inside the mini lab, bent forward and then flipped back. See the pendulum moving very rapidly in more than one direction. See a balloon inflating and pushing the cards out of the way. The balloon's inflated off of a micro switch in the lower right corner. Now, notice that this moves to the right and then mails itself very rapidly off to Marion Nestor.
One of the most amazing things
Yeah.
in your mini lab experiments, to my mind, was seeing the films of the pen, the writing instrument, with no hand, no means of propulsion, whatever. The mechanism of it. How many times have you gotten it? Just once an oddball. How many? Umpteen. More than a dozen?
Oh, yes. Now, I'll give you the best of the dozen. Let's say a couple.
Okay.
A couple of them was the first excellent one was when we had a theft here in town of mail. And the Postal Authority offered $5,000 reward. And you'll see the $5,000 reward printed announcement inside of the mini-lab. And by it is a pen. And I asked of the mini-lab to please write the answer, where are the thieves? And it did so. I'm not going to say whether it successfully did so. They weren't caught, but it did tell where they allegedly lived. And it was in clean English. We could read it. It was in the English language, in the style of writing as John King has rendered. John King is a decedent from way back there, alleged. At any rate, this writing occurred on camera. And you can see the pen neatly writing just as if normally held by hand. And the answer is given right there in the mini-lab. There's no question about it. But now the better method of doing it was a later experience in which the mini-lab had in it a pen, paper, and on the outside of the mini-lab are 5 little fingers of paper hanging down from the top. That's on some of this film elsewhere. And first thing you know, that caught fire. Now, spontaneous combustion has been known as a paranormal fact from way back. It is rare, and it also is questionable as to whether it is fraud, but here you can see it. Now, unfortunately, you can't see the fire begin as you can elsewhere on this film when there is an incipience of the flame from de novo, and it is phenomenal. In fact, it involves 2 rings that are linked. I won't get into that because that does not pertain to writing. But this writing occurred with pen inside Minilab while, and you can clearly see the pen writing something, never mind what. It has nothing to do with the theft at $5,000 reward. This is a later occasion. But it was writing while outside of the Minilab, immediately outside, flames were consuming these 5 fingers of paper that were dangling down from the level of the top of the Minilab. They had been put there for some other reason, irrelevant. But the fact is they were burning and the pen was writing and the pen was inside, and you can clearly see them both. Now, who on earth can explain that by conceivable fraud?
How does this come about, the entity letters, so-called? What are they?
Well, they're simply communications with entities who began by moving objects in the mini-lab. Of course, it began much longer than that, so many centuries. But inside the mini-lab, we noted that pen could get up and write, and we have the films of that, which obviously you have seen. But we decided that there were so many of them, when Ed took the mini-lab over to his garage to work over there with it, we simply left the sheets of paper here.
Let me get a close-up of that, please. I can.
Kenai Callow, who is now Mrs. Kenai Gregory, and L.A. Fithian decided to supply some stationery. We would leave that out as extra paper and leave a couple of pens and check every now and then to make sure they hadn't gone dry, and would put the letters from various people out on the bench.
I see you have an ordinary
lab.
ballpoint pen instead of felt tip pen too?
Yes, most of the writing's done with the felt tip.
Yeah. And so how's it work? I mean,
They
just
fingerprinted it many times and haven't, you know, if Ed wipes it, it doesn't have fingerprints on it afterward.
No,
If he's
okay.
touched it, it still has his, and so forth.
Yes.
I just leave it alone, except when it's on the floor, I pick it up and put it back on the table again. So I guess it has mine once in a while, but that doesn't have anything to do with the messages. apparently our invisible friends do not leave fingerprints, but I guess Walter could if he ever came around.
Well, what's the mechanism,
Accidental mastic.
Tom? The SORRAT, you pose a question and let their stationery and send it here, or what? How's it work?
Well, people, variety of people decide that they have a question. They would like to see if the entities would answer it. They include a stamped self-addressed envelope. They send it here. I put it out on the bench, and there's absolutely no way to prove that it's genuine, of course, except that sometimes it answers rather interestingly. And pretty soon it, pretty soon in the sense of seconds, pretty soon in the sense of months, we don't have any consistency in the amount of time taken up. The letters vanish, apparently are posted or else appear in the home of the person occasionally, but not regularly. Sometimes from distant cities, sometimes with foreign stamps and so on, as you know.
Approximately how many people submit questions over a given period of time? How many in the pool? SORRAT pool, more or less?
I'd say about 25.
25. And suppose they do not enclose a stamped addressed envelope. What happens? Does it stay here longer? Does it disappear anyway?
If they do not include it, I will do it myself, put a stamp on an envelope for them. But I ask them, please don't do this, because
Sure.
if one person starts doing it, everybody will do it, and then I'm buying stamps and envelopes, and I don't like to do that. Besides, it's less valid that way, I think. It all started with Jim McLennan's, starting it with leaving a postcard, and then when he got a response from a postcard left inside the mini lab,
Yes.
Patience Worth postcard, I guess that was about 1981. I'd have to look in my notes to see the
Yes.
exact date, but it was at Easter, and he got a little Easter message, and he thought that was very neat, and went up to Skyrim and learned more, and decided to set up an experiment with letters as a sociologist, not interested in the tight conditions, but just to see the variety of responses he could get through the letters, and he started being surprised that they came not just from Raw, but from other places and so on.
That's all since 1981?
Very often the messages are put, say, Ellie Fithian has a envelope there, and Hubert might have another envelope
Sure.
there, and there's a letter, her letter might go into your envelope, yours might go into hers. And we've gotten the explanation from our invisible friends that this creates a group harmony or rapport, and as soon as you can get that, you have much more chance of getting anything whatsoever. That if each person just pursues his own little goals and doesn't cooperate with the others, there's no energy involved in that. In fact, it drains it out pretty soon. It's like either having a car with a generator working or having it working off the battery only, and pretty soon it's completely dead.
Who are the communicators in order of frequency?
All right, the one doing most of the writing, and you can use examples to show that the handwriting is consistent in most cases. John King is the one who does the scribe work.
Yeah.
Puts it, and part of his penance for the life he led, apparently. He has to fiddle around with things like this, and the Imperator group has been involved.
Who comprises that?
Oh Lord, I think there are about 57 different
57
different entities, and also we learned this. I found strange because we found someone in England who's got the same information. Jim Ellis got some of the same information through the years. Members of the group take names of office, and they rotate the offices once in a while. The Imperator is the leader, the rector, expediter, and so forth down the line, mentor. They have different functions and perform them. Jim McLennan once asked them to tell him about that, and they gave him a sort of box organizational chart with little lines running from central authority to each department. down to individual human agents who work with them and so forth.
And Dr. Neihart is a communicator too from time to time.
Usually at Skyrim, almost never here.
Almost never here.
Very, very rarely, and we feel very honored. He was a good friend.
Of all the communicators, purported communicators, who was the most frequent in reference to the writings?
One John King, who allegedly came to pass 2 centuries ago, and whose daughter was Katie King, a very eminent physical medium studied by Sir William Crookes. That's anecdotal. But Mr. John King was a buccaneer and also later reformed, joined Sir Henry Morgan when his ships conquered Jamaica, or whatever they did in those early days of colonial Britain. And then he left, let's see, where did he reside? I've forgotten. His history is in the biographies of psychic mediums.
What credence do you give to this at face value?
Oh, I don't know, except that Tom Richards knew of John King, and so did Joe Mangini. They both have, particularly Joe Mangini, have had ESP experiences and physical experiences that happen in their lives occasionally. And they knew the literature, and Dr. Neihart knew of John King. He'd read widely. His library in the university now, to which he donated that library, I've examined it, on psychical research, includes several hundred excellent books. Sure. So he was very interested, mainly because his wife had an earlier interest, Mona Neihart. She, when her name was Mortensen, was the helper of Funkin' Wagnalls when they were preparing their encyclopedia, one edition of it. They hired her to write and research the subject of psychical research. And she had been interested in it before then, and when she married Dr. Neihart, he became interested. And then when he investigated the American Indians of the plains and found that they too had holy men who could accomplish production of rain and production of physical phenomena, they could cause their tents to shake without touching them, and various other things. The shaking tent phenomenon is fairly well known.
Do you have any explanation for the shaking tent, or as when I was in Skyrim, the whole room shook?
Yeah.
Lit up and up.
Same thing. Same thing. Psychokinesis.
Well, it seemed to be actually shaking, but a stupid person said, why aren't there cracks or pictures askew and so on?
I don't know what really happens when the floor shakes. I do know that when the tent would shake, it clearly does shake, and when the table shakes, and when other things shake, if no hands are upon it, then it is obviously doing so. In fact, our wraps, I have seen our wraps attack one of their metal tea trays, and you can see the buckling of the tin very clearly if you look at the proper reflection of light. And it's conspicuous that it isn't just imaginary hallucinated sound, because now this box is a smaller one that he successfully did an excellent job of locking up for Yorkshire television. These coins down here were laid by me inside on 8 little receptacles within, with the hopes that they would vanish and go into on the table. Well, actually only 1 was found on the table. The remaining 7 were shipped off by mail to 7 different members of the community, 7 people I know, some of whom were SORRAT members, like Apoff and McLennan and others. These coins thus, one of them went to Arthur C. Clarke. In fact, it went into Arthur C. Clarke's home through a letter that was placed in here by Yorkshire. The Yorkshire Authority, Mr. Adam Hart Davis, who was the director of the filming crew, put a letter which was typewritten on the spot by his stenographer and secretary, typewriter and all, in my backyard where they filmed the whole business. And it was addressed with an ordinary amount of stamps, but it vanished from here. As you see, it is no longer here. You also can see that these 2 locks are absolutely, genuinely secure. They have jammed key on the interior, and a tissue paper glued on top of that with super glue by the paid locksmith, and he has signed it with his name. Both of them are still there, and there's not a way in the world normally that you can open this and get in. But paranormally, it was no problem. The letter did vanish, and it went through the mails to Mr. Arthur C. Clarke in Sri Lanka. It was received by him with a couple of foreign stamps slapped on it, from what source we do not know. I know that it wasn't any hanky-panky because the hanky-pankiest would first have to open this pair of locks that I've just shown you and get in there and remove the letter. And there's the enigma.
You can see a matchbook moving inside the box. Moves back and forth almost like an insect. Here the entire box moves. Here it comes. It's moving independently. Notice movement of rings through the glass front of the mini lab. Notice that the rings are going to link now. Watch the rings carefully. You can see this in slow motion. A small film packet has also exited. It later, its dental x-ray film showed a curved radiation mark where the linking rings had been lying on top of it. Now you notice that the rings unlink. One goes back inside the mini lab, leans on the front glass. Now you notice there's going to be some more ring movement. Watch the rings carefully. Notice this took place at 12:21 or 12:20. I can't quite see that figure on the clock. Midnight. Now you notice that a small medicine valve is dropping off of a micro switch at the front of the mini lab. Then you notice there's more activity. There comes a pin. Rings are now linked again. And now they're going to unlink, standing upright, one inside the mini lab and one outside the mini lab. Please go to normal speed now. Often these things would happen between experiments so that they were not actually filmed. There is a bar that has been bent inside the sealed locked mini lab. Now you can see a letter that is going rapidly off of the typewriter. It mails itself and is gone. The letter later was received by the person to whom it was addressed. Notice that a plastic knight target object is moving over to the left. It's exerting a great deal of pressure apparently on a spoon, which it's jerked off of its micro switch, a large serrated draining label, pushing it over very hard against the side of the mini lab. Under normal circumstances, I think the knight should have broken. Cox shows the knight has moved, then he shows what has happened to the ladle. The handle has bent. Now you can see the knight again in motion, moving from left to right as a balloon is inflated off of its micro switch to the right. The blown egg into which a key later apported has wedged itself on the knight's battle axe through the small hole in the end of the egg, and as the knight and the egg are moving toward the right. Now watch carefully what will happen. The knight is moving toward the right. The cords which were dangling from the top of the mini lab have wrapped themselves around the knight, and now at this point watch those rings carefully. Please go to 2 frames a second. The paper rings are sitting on top of the clock, and as the knight moves further to the right, you're going to see them link. Then they'll erect themselves against the mini lab, and then, apparently due to friction, they will ignite at the point where they linked. So you can go to the linkage, please. Now watch the rings carefully. They're cut from a unusual magazine so that they couldn't be duplicated. Cox has placed them on top of the clock. Watch them link. They're going to link very rapidly. Now they are linked. The rings are linked. The knight continues to move in the background. Now watch the point of linkage. See it darken slightly, char slightly, and finally burst into flame. It's darkening, little smoke is starting to arise. And now it is catching fire. You can go to normal speed now, please. Now watch this disappear. I went to Marion Nestor in New York. Pin's moving. Unfortunately, it has a large blob of solder wire stuck on its tip, so you don't get much message. See that the parasol has hooked itself onto the knight's battle axe, and the parasol and Cox's brown sealed bottle are both moving from left toward right inside the mini lab. You see a box now moving toward the left, then it will move quickly back toward the right, and then move toward the left again. This box contained a small atomizer. It's going to move toward the right. Now a pin is moving on paper, but it is not erect and it's not writing. It's simply scooting about. It's going to move toward the right. Now a pin is moving on paper, but it is not erect and it's not writing. It's simply scooting about. Now go to 2 frames a second, please. These plastic rings have come out of the mini lab. The glass is unbroken, as you can see, and the 2 rings are now linked. The X of string shows where the glass front of the mini lab is. You see a second ring, a leather one, come out and join the other 2. Small dental packet tips over, pin falls, vanishes. Pin erects itself, vanishes. One of the rings has fallen now. It will rapidly join itself onto the 2 rings that are already linked, making 3 linked rings, leather and 2 plastic. The pin balances the front of the mini lab. Now the rings have separated and vanished. Actually, they fell onto the floor in front of the mini lab out of range of the camera. We found them there later. Now you'll notice the timer is moving. Timer started when the mini lab began. Shows 1 revolution a second. Clipboard is moving to the right, the back of the mini lab.
Of all the things you've recorded in the mini lab, under those rigid, those strictest of all conditions,
Yes?
what to you is the most appealing, personally?
Most appealing are the various movements that go on inside the mini lab, some of which are unique, like a plastic knight, a soldier dressed with his halberd in his hand, and he slides across the mini lab.
Yeah.
And a bolt of cloth or wool string jumps onto it. Then an egg with a hole in the end. I had made a blown egg and put it in there,
Yeah.
and it hopped on top of the halberd. And it's all filmed.
I have it perfect.
You asked me earlier, I mentioned about the paper rings that linked. They were the most phenomenal linkage because they were so clear. And they actually happened outside of the mini lab. I had placed a pair of paper rings 3 inches in diameter right in front of the camera in the mini lab and hoped that they would link. I wrote a little note to the agencies that be asking that these link. Well, first thing you know, the 2 rings rose up from their position on top of my electric clock that always sits in front of the mini lab. And they popped down and stood on edge against the glass mini lab, I suppose, and then rolled towards one another and then instantly linked together, just very instantly. Then, while in that obviously linked position, they slowly developed a black spot at the top center, and that was incendiary, because the first thing you know, flame issued from it 2 seconds later, and it destroyed both rings, half of both rings, and it ruined ever our finding a permanently linked pair of paper rings. I admit that's a very nice, phenomenal novelty to have fire start from de novo. But I'd rather have the permanent wooden paper rings. That's just one of them. Then the other one you saw earlier, leather rings linking, they linked a dozen times in our history. Most of the time that they linked were very complex. They would link and unlink instantly. They would link and pop through the glass of a mini lab and come back out and link again. And then we had a couple of big rings that were made out of plastic as thick as your thumb, pyramid toy rings. And both of them, 2 of them, linked and unlinked. One of them hopped through the glass of a mini lab, clearly visible on film, landed down in front of the mini lab to join its mate. And while it was resting on top of its mate, it proceeded, as you have seen on the film, to disappear totally, and then to reappear in the next frame and link together. I looked through my little projector and I saw this balloon turn over, and this balloon stuck its little neck up, and a piece of string 6 inches long that I had laying nearby for the purpose of tying itself into a knot. I wrote a little note, please string, tie knot around neck of this balloon. And that string can be seen on camera somewhere else in this reel, tying itself fairly fast around the neck of the yellow balloon, which fortunately had its neck uppermost and in view, just by chance.
That's spectacular. Remember that.
Then that definitely was tied, and then the balloon repeatedly inflated and deflated and inflated and deflated.
In what direction do you think you should proceed now and others should proceed? What do you feel from your vast experience here is the most practical approach? What should be done? You've established it in your mind, in the minds of those who are close to you, that it's a fact, irrespective of the explanation. Where do we go from here?
Well, Dr. Ryan said once, way back there, when someone asked a similar question of him, what do we do in order to produce this, that, and the other? He said, well, first catch the rabbit, if you want rabbit stew. So that's what I say here. Let us first get a physical sensitive, a man who might call himself a medium and who is known for his ability, and then set up these sophisticated equipment. I recommend the latter, sophisticated equipment, because it hasn't been done before. Now, it has been done to some extent with one person I shall name in a moment, and that person, unfortunately, did not cooperate with me when, as a committee of four, as a chairman of a committee in the Institute for Parapsychology many years ago, I asked him down repeatedly. His name is Uri Geller. I had seen him in New York take a key in my hand and bend it, me still controlling the key. Did it twice. He even unjammed my sealed gold watch, and I mean it was sealed. He unjammed it. He caused the regulator arm to whisk over to the other side. He damaged a piece of tin foil I had placed inside as a target object. And he just about fell out of his seat when I difficultly opened the back and showed it to him. But at any rate, he has what it takes. Never mind what critical magicians say. I've interviewed various ones of them. And therefore, it is he that I wish we could get in those old days to cooperate with us in being tested for his general ability at ESP and PK, but he was too busy entertaining in music halls and whatever else. That happened to be his forte. Just one of those things. And now if we can find other Gellers here and there, and there might be some in the other necks of the woods we don't know of, then fine. Let us get them and train them to be accommodating to a motion picture camera. After they read the book that is soon to come out, a sequel to Dr. Richards' book, Scientific, the one that I have just finished, just sent off to the printer, but it hasn't been processed.
And the name of your book again? Tentative title.
A scientific investigation of telekinesis, psychokinesis, I forget which word I used. The SORRAT. The SORRAT, a scientific investigation of telekinesis.